Picking up with Simone de Beauvoir's essay Pyrrhus Cineas, again from the Philosophical Writings text. We came to the instant. This is the section on page 95 that we're starting with here. The first section, Candide's Garden. Candide is a character, of course, from Voltaire. And Voltaire is using Candide to criticize a doctrine that comes out of Leibniz. And this is that we live in the best of all possible worlds. No matter how bad things look from the human perspective, we live in the best of all possible worlds. Part of the argument concerns God. God sees all possibilities, and yet God chose to actualize this world. This is the actual world, the one that God chose to bring into actuality from all the possibilities, and because God is good, this must be the best of all possible worlds. Voltaire takes this poor character, Candide, and runs him through the ringer. I mean, all kinds of horrible things. It's kind of a funny satire. It's dark. The humor of it is dark because so many terrible things happen to Candide. But it's basically to say that this can't be the best of all possible worlds, right? I think one of the things that Beauvoir's doing by playing on this reference a little bit is that if our actions are founding our person in the world, but if they're also founding values, if they're playing a role in generating and maintaining values in the world, well, then there is no best possible world. There's no standard to determine what the best possible world is. There's better and worse. And we'd have to decide whether to make the world better and in what sense, or if we're going to allow it to be worse, or if we want to make it worse. I mean, there are people like accelerationists, right? They think, well, let's make the world worse. Now, ultimately, they want to make the world worse because they think by accelerating the bad effects, you'll reach a crucial breaking point and maybe come out better on the other side or something like that, right? But this idea to actually worsen and deepen a crisis, to accelerate it in order to reach the crucial moment, there's someone who sort of is desiring to make, at least temporarily, a worse world, right? So no one is going to come and save us. No one's going to come and say, here it is. Now, when we turn from that discussion of our projects, how they involve us with other people, how they involve a commitment of our whole being, and it's one that we must decide and make decisions about and negotiate. She starts to talk about, alternatives. How do people try, or how do we escape or try to escape this, right? One of the ways we do that is to focus on the instant. If I am no longer anything but a body, barely a place in the sun, and in the instant that measures my breath, that I am released from all worries, fears, as well as regrets. Nothing moves me, nothing matters to me. I attach myself only to this minute that my life is filling up. That alone is a tangible prey, a presence. Only the impression of the moment exists. So, by shrinking ourselves down to this instant, we atomize ourselves in time. And again, this severs our connection to things. That idea of severing one's connection, of attempting to remove oneself from your historical moment, your past, your life trajectory, your family, all of this. There might be good practical reasons to actually physically separate yourself from your family. But if you conceive of yourself in total isolation as having no relationship, that is a sort of existential error. And in fact, part of why you might need to reasonably separate yourself from your family is exactly because of the relationship that you have and the context that you have, right? So we're seeing here that this is again why I prefaced the situation. We're seeing that the situation is hugely important in terms of who we are, but we cannot be who we are without that sort of situation. the instant shrinks us down to nothing, to a point, to something unconnected, that can't be affected by anything. And if it can't be affected by anything, it can't really have projects. It can't respond to anything in the building of its project. It can't be struck by something and say, oh, that's beautiful, I want to pursue that beauty, or I want to recreate that beauty somehow through an artistic project, or, oh, I'd like to build that, you know, wow, that's really cool, look at that car, I'd like to build a car, build that engine, or whatever it is that, you know, people are doing, right? To rest, to be disconnected in this way, might seem to some people like a kind of enjoyment. Oh, well, then wouldn't that be restful though? Wouldn't that release from these entanglements be a good thing? I think of like Dr. Manhattan in The Watchmen. He like flees to Mars. You know, he's like, I'm tired of being entangled in the lives of these people and that kind of thing. Notice though that Dr. Manhattan still undertakes a big project in The Watchmen, the creation of this like big glass, even in isolation, in his situation on Mars, he's still sort of trapped. He would see it as trapped, probably, right? Beauvoir says no, though. Real enjoyment is not the kind of rest that this is. The instant represents a different kind of rest, right? This isn't enjoyment here, because she says, as soon as I eliminate the distance that, in separating me from the object, allows me to throw myself toward it, to be movement and transcendence, this fixed union of the object and me no longer exists except in the way a thing does. So I can't even really rest if I isolate myself in the instant, because rest is, again, a type of involvement. It's a type of engagement with the world. I worked really hard and I come home and I rest. I mean, rest is in a way like a kind of activity. You say colloquially or casually, oh, I'm not doing anything. But you are you're relaxing on the couch, or playing a video game, or painting a picture, or having a beer with your friends, or enjoying the sun on your porch swing, or on the stoop with your buddies. Those are all things that we do, and they're restful and we enjoy them. But according to the way the existentialists conceive of consciousness and the for itself, you can't even be aware of those things without this distance and this separation. The object cannot stand before you as an object of your enjoyment unless you have this sort of distance. You cannot collapse yourself into it. And that distance involves time. It involves the past that you have been and the future that you are not yet. So you're always in this state of sort of incompleteness, in this state of openness that can't be reduced down to an object. The minute you reduce down to an object, you cease to be able to have any engagement or consciousness of enjoyment or anything at all. So that's, I think, an important part of the instant, right? She says clearly that if you want to rest and tear yourself away from the world, then you must renounce even enjoyment. And she says Epicureans, that's part of their thing, is to withdraw in on yourself and just watch the world sort of flow by. It's no longer any good nor evil facing me, nor anxiety within me. I am, and nothing means anything to me anymore. Now she says that this is kind of how she's being a little facetious and criticizing this way of thinking of life. She compares it to a child who sulks in the corner, and they say they don't care anymore, but they soon get bored and they fidget and they're drawn back into their engagements and commitments eventually. So this is something that Sartre had described as a metastable condition. So you can sort of live this way, even predominantly, like, oh, I don't care. You can sort of work yourself into this state that you have to maintain. But just because of the nature of how we are as for itself, just because of the basic structure of consciousness that's always like incomplete and self-overcoming and capable of change and capable of new and different possibilities, it's always gonna the facade is gonna crack. The veil is gonna be pulled back from time to time. So even if you're able to live in the instant, mostly, it can't be perpetually maintained. You're gonna see, oh, the little cracks in it. You're gonna be the child fidgeting, like, and eventually, because that's already a kind of activity, a kind of restlessness that is bringing you back into your connections and back into your project, right? She, again, here tells you first what she's sort of rejecting. We can't collapse ourselves into the instant and live only there. What can we do? Well, so then she returns to the existentialist sort of influences, Hegel, Heidegger. Here she talks about how Hegel says, reality should never be conceived as an interiority hidden in the depths of an appearance. Appearance hides nothing, it expresses. Interiority is not different from an exteriority. Appearance is itself reality. So the appearance, traditionally, philosophers have treated appearance as something that is covering over a deep hidden truth. The appearance hides the idea, or the appearance obscures the essence. And part of the problem philosophically has been, how do we get the essence out? What Beauvoir is trying to develop out of this Hegelian tradition is that no, appearance doesn't hide anything, it expresses it. It brings it out into the open and makes it present. There's nothing hiding behind the appearance, no hidden essence or being. Being is appearance. To appear in this way is to be. What is appears to us. So there's nothing to be sort of, no hidden depths of appearance to be plumbed or anything like that. There's no like sort of hidden inside. Things are sort of on the surface being expressed to us through the appearance. And that's what we engage with. We engage with the world in the ways that it appears. And we can affect how it appears by engaging it differently, right? There's no doubt an object there, but the significance of the object might change in relation to my project. So an object could appear to be an obstacle that is impeding my progress, that I need to get around or I need to get over or out of the way. It could appear to me as like an opportunity. Oh, look, here if I'm walking down a path and a tree's fallen, and there's the object, a tree. But the significance of the tree could change if, for say, I need firewood back home. Oh, this is in my way, but it's also an opportunity, right? I need, some firewood. Even the idea that the tree would appear to me as firewood. If you don't have a home with wood burning stove, or if you don't like to sit around the fire with your friends or whatever, it might not even occur to you that that tree could be or is in some way firewood. And so the tree's not going to appear to you in that way. It's, again, rooted in your past, in your circumstances and situation. The projects that you shape are, in part, are related to that, and related to the life and the project that you're already involved in, right? So the way that things appear is shaped and molded by our engagement with them. It doesn't create them out of whole cloth. It doesn't just conjure a tree out of nothing or something like that. This is a typical sort of misunderstanding of existentialism and a lot of sort of postmodernist theory generally. Existentialism is sort of on the cusp of the kind of late. They're involved in a lot of sort of modernist literary projects, but they're definitely theoretically leaning into sort of this structuralist moment of criticizing structuralism. You know, they're right, sort of the generation before Derrida and Foucault are coming up. So existentialism holds a kind of weird kind of middle ground. You can definitely see a lot of influence on postmodernism and important postmodernist sort of ideas and themes in existentialism. But I don't know how I exactly classify them. I don't quite consider existentialism to be sort of postmodernism in the sense that we associate with someone like Foucault or Derrida and those sort of post-structural critiques. Although in my experience, in France at least, they're not, the term post-structuralism doesn't quite hold the purchase that it does in the United States, but things could have changed since the last time I was in France. But anyway, we don't just create objects out of whole cloth. We don't just snap our fingers and trees and stuff appear. But the meaning and the significance of those objects is shaped by our relationship to them. And that can affect the way that does the tree appear to me as the possibility of becoming timber or firewood, or does it appear to me as the possibility of hanging a tree, a swing in it, or building a tree house, or something like that. Is it an obstacle? If I'm mowing the lawn, the tree has a kind of an obstacle to it or something like that, right? You can think, I'm using sort of basic, sort of suburban examples in a way, like mowing the lawn and crap, but you can really think about this in any context. I mean, just try to think of something in your house or in your, neighborhood community that different people might see differently. They're seeing the same object, it's the same thing in a strict sense, but in another way, the way that object appears in the context of their project and takes on meaning and significance relative to that person's goals and aspirations and all of that kind of stuff. That's what's significant there. So I want to get into the next section here. One last thing about that section is this. She talks a little bit about wisdom, right? And she returns to the trope of Pyrrhus, right? She says, well, one, she introduces a very important concept here at the end, ambiguity, right? But she also has this discussion about wisdom, right? She says, this is on page 99, so I've skipped ahead just a little bit here. This very ambiguity seems to authorize the irony of the humorist. Isn't Pyrrhus absurd to leave in order to return home? Isn't the tennis player absurd to hit a ball in order for someone to send it back to him? And the skier absurd to climb a slope in order to immediately come back down? Not only does the goal conceal itself, but the successive goals contradict each other, and the undertaking is completed only in destroying itself. But here the humorist uses a sophism. He decomposes all human activity into elementary acts whose juxtaposition appears contradictory. If he completed the decomposition to recover the pure instant, then all contradiction would disappear. Only a shapeless incoherence would remain, a pure contingency that would neither outrage nor astonish. So what's happening here is that when we say that these projects are absurd, it's because we're sort of cutting up the time segments that are involved in the project in order to make them absurd. Of course, when you're skiing, to go back up the hill just to come back down, to frame it in that way, to understand it as, oh, you just come up and go back down, that makes it appear absurd. But when you're actually skiing or any other project like that, what's important to you is the moment sort of coming down the hill. You're going up so that you can have that experience of coming back down. And there are things about each part. Maybe you enjoy the quiet of riding the ski lift, and you can see you're going up the mountain, and it takes you up somewhat slow, and you're kind of enjoying that moment there. It's part of the overall project of getting up to the top of the hill, and then you can slide. You have the excitement and the exhilaration of, skiing back down again. When you start to look at things from that perspective, it doesn't seem absurd, because it's not about, I go up just to come back down. No, I go up and come back down in order to have these certain experiences that I value for certain reasons, and so on and so forth, right? She says then, you can't define it from the outside. The project is exactly what it decides to be. It has the meaning it gives to itself. So it's the person skiing who determines the value of the skiing, because they're the one doing it. They can tell you why they're going up the hill and coming back down. The person from the outside can't tell you that. And they're prone to cut it up and tell you about it in ways that are sort of contradictory or seem absurd. From the outside, someone who's not having the experience, who isn't actually engaged in the project, oh, you go up and you come back down. But that's not how the person who's actually doing it would tell you about it at all. And in fact, they would probably protest and say, no, I'm not just going up to come back down again. That has the whole project sort of framed wrong, right? So wisdom doesn't consist of withdrawing into oneself. The wise man himself, who advises the immobility of rest to his disciples, contradicts this advice by giving it. He should not say anything, because, of course, giving advice to people is not exactly rest. You're doing something. You're not withdrawing into yourself. You're addressing your advice to other people. There's the connection to the other again, right? So that section, the instant, basically, you can't just collapse yourself into an object, into an instantaneous moment in time, totally locked into your body. You need these connections. You need the context, even just to act and to be conscious in the first place. So this isn't even really like, in some ways this is an ethical imperative, like don't just withdraw into yourself and cut off from the world, but also it's kind of a metaphysical, like ontological impossibility. You actually cannot just withdraw into yourself and disconnect from the world. That's just not possible because of the kind of being you are as being for itself. That already involves a distance from yourself, so that the object can appear before you, so that you can understand your own project, a spread in time, the past that you were, the present that you're trying to be, and the future that you are not yet, it's yet to come. Those are key elements of this project. Compare that then and contrast it with the infinity section that comes next on page 100. The instant has very strict limits on it. Infinity comes back the other way and says, what about no limits? Why then would Candide choose to assign no limit to his garden? If man is always somewhere else, then why isn't he everywhere? Expanded to the borders of the world, would he experience that rest he was looking for by contracting into himself? If I am everywhere, where will I go? Movement disappears here as surely as if I were nowhere. This is exactly the opposite problem. Expanding ourselves too large, we go to the other extreme. We lose a similar purchase on the world. That little boy was not your brother, said the parents. They only added, you're not going to cry your whole life. Each day there are thousands of children across the earth who die. So here the boy is faced with the other problem. You can't cry about everybody. Every day children die. Not all our life, so why 5 minutes? Not over all children, why over this one? If all men are my brothers, no particular man is my brother any longer. Multiplying the ties that bind me to the world by infinity is a way of denying those that unite me to this singular minute, to this singular corner of the earth. So if the instant contracts us such that we don't have any connections, the other view toward the infinite multiplies our connections such that none of them can hold any specific meaning. Part of why the choice is significant between loving your brother or loving the stranger or trying to love both is that these are sort of specifics. It's my particular brother, this particular stranger, the concierge's son or whatever. But if I just try to generalize, oh, I love everybody, well, what good is that then? If I went home to my spouse and said, honey, you know, I love you, but I basically love everybody in the world just the same as I love you, she's probably not going to be very happy with me because our relationship is supposed to be special in some way. It's not to say that I want to kick everybody else in the face or anything like that, but it is to say that person's special because I picked to be that with them and spend my life with them and so on and so forth. My friends, right, are the people that I choose to be around, that I have a particular inclination toward, and that I'm invested in their well-being, and I like worry about them. I know things like specifically about them in context. It's just not possible again. It's not just an ethical concern, but it's this sort of ontological that it's not possible to have that kind of relationship with everybody in the world. And the fact of your concrete and particular engagements and relationships with people means that they have a certain and specific significance that you can't generalize in a way. Right? This effort to identify myself with the universal immediately receives a denial. It is impossible for me to assert that this is the universal that it is, since I am asserting it. By asserting it, I make myself be. It is I who am. As I distinguish myself from my pure presence by reaching out toward something other than me, I also distinguish myself from this other toward which I reach by the very fact that I reach toward it. My presence is, it breaks up the unity and the continuity of that massive indifference into which I wanted it to be absorbed. Right? So, again, I'm forging these connections as soon as I am become conscious of anything. My consciousness takes me beyond myself. It takes me out into the world, but it always is taking me to particular specifics. It doesn't take me to some universal, abstract idea. It takes me to this community, to this person, to this relationship. So just as it's impossible for me to sink into the instant and atomize myself into a point with no connection, it's also impossible for me to go the other way and expand my self into infinity and to think on this universal level. We'll see in the ethics of ambiguity particularly, there's some issues here that I think Beauvoir is really taking some swings at Kant and other universalist ethics that have a highly abstract character. We'll see developing in existentialism that there are important values that are taken to be absolute. The value of individual life, the value of freedom, for instance. And the reasons why they're taken to be of absolute value are interesting and it's worth thinking about, right? Especially given everything that Beauvoir has been saying about the importance of particular context, the things that she'll say about the situation and so on, right? Now, we don't receive these absolute values like freedom from on high, from some transcendental source outside of human existence. So we have to think carefully about how the existentialists are going to try to establish this absolute value, especially given how much they are sort of bucking against these abstract universalist types of ethics, right? That you can't inhabit that space, that you can't think of everybody universally in some kingdom of ends where everyone is a pure, rational being following a universal law that it legislates to itself and all this, kind of stuff. So I'm going to stop again there because the next section that starts on page 102 is about God, and that might be just a good sort of short standalone video just to talk for a second about how the existentialists think about God. They're atheists, so what do they think sort of about God, the concept, and how does that relate particularly to something like bad faith? Because if God wills it, then there's no choice that we have to make. It just is because God willed it so. And that proposes particular philosophical problems for the existentialists. So I will stop this video here, and I will do a shorter, perhaps, video just on the God section, and then we'll move into the rest of Pyrrhus and Cineas.